I wanted to talk today's history video about the election of 2004. Last week we did the election of 2008. And I think it's important to look at these past elections to get a construct within which to view the election of 2012. In 2004, Bush was in very strong shape. He had effectively dealt with the 9/11 crisis. He'd stopped any further follow-on attacks. He beefed up national security with the Patriot Act. He toppled the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, and he toppled Saddam Hussein in Iraq. And the casualties in Iraq had not swollen to their subsequent levels. For the Democrats, it looked like John Kerry was going to be their candidate. And then an amazing thing happened. Howard Dean burst forward, took the lead, and it looked like he was going to topple Kerry. And the reason he did it was that he was the governor of Vermont, and he had approved gay marriage and was strongly against the war in Iraq, which none of the other Democratic candidates at that time were. They had all voted for it. And as a result, Dean became the darling of the anti-war activists and the gay activists. And he was flooded with online contributions. A brilliant political consultant who you sometimes see on Fox, Joe Trippi, organized that and realized the power of the internet as a fundraising tool. Well, when Dean began to surge, the Clintons and the Kennedys were very upset about Dean taking over the Democratic Party. They felt he was too liberal, that he'd get destroyed, just like Obama was too liberal. And they sabotaged Dean's candidacy by releasing dirt on him and doing all kinds of negatives to him. And as a result, Kerry moved to the fore, won the Iowa caucuses, and won the subsequent primaries. His opponent in those other primaries, after Dean had fallen apart, was John Edwards, who was burst on the national scene and was running for president. And Edwards waged an effective campaign against Dean, but the calendar, against Kerry, but the calendar was so front-loaded, the primaries came one after another, one a week almost, that it really was only a 5 or 6 week period between the time Dean fell apart and the time Kerry got enough votes to clinch the nomination. So Edwards really had no chance. And he was subsequently nominated for vice president and ran on the ticket. Once the nominees were set, they went to their conventions. And the Democrats bet everything on Kerry's war record in Vietnam. They really didn't talk much about his Senate record. They didn't talk much about his positions on issues. They dwelt on his service in Vietnam. Clinton gave a speech where he said, whenever there was a crisis, send John Kerry. A crisis in Vietnam, send John Kerry. Crisis in Korea, send John Kerry. And the whole thing was his swift boat career, and they had soldiers or sailors who'd served with him and all of that. But the fact was that Kerry was the leader of Vietnam veterans against the war. That's how he won his Senate seat in Massachusetts. And he was a strong resistor, just a few shades to the right of Jane Fonda. And for him to run on the basis of his service in the Vietnam War, when everybody knew he had been an activist against it, was a bit of a stretch. But the Democrats had a nice bounce from their convention. And it wasn't until early August that the Republicans, a group of Republicans, answered with a video on the swift boat experience, where they quoted guys who'd served with Kerry in the swift boats, who really diminished his military service. There were implications that his third wound that brought him home was either not serious or kind of phony. There were implications that he didn't deserve the medals that he got, and they talked at length about how down they were when he began to attack the war after he came home. That increasingly knocked Kerry down. Then the Republican convention came, and Bush did a superb job at that convention of really rallying the country, talking about the defense and the war on terror, and making that his issue. Dan Rather at CBS News sought to deflate Bush's balloon right after his convention by publishing a story and running it on CBS that Bush had pulled strings to avoid being called up when he was in the reserve during the Vietnam War. And he produced a letter that Bush allegedly sent to the guy who was in charge of his regiment, the general, and asking not to be called up or explaining why he couldn't be called up. And then the bloggers went to work and they realized that the letter was dated something like June 12th of, 19 something or other, and it was 12th with a th above. And typewriters of that day couldn't do that. Only modern computers can do that. And they spotted that, and that proved that the letter had to be a forgery. And that destroyed the Kerry campaign counteroffensive over the Vietnam record, and by the way, led to Rather being bounced out of CBS News, and really was, I think, the beginning of the absolute collapse of the credibility of the news networks. Soon all of their anchors were replaced, and their ratings really went down. Then Kerry and Bush went into a fairly even contest as the election unfolded. And it became clear that whenever the election focused on Iraq or the war on terror, Bush was ahead. But whenever it focused on any domestic policy, education, environment, the elderly, Social Security, Medicare, any of that, it was to Kerry's advantage. So it became a question not of what you felt about these issues, but about which was the dominant issue in the election. So the first debate was on foreign policy, and Bush was very effective and got a nice bounce from that. But then the last debate was on domestic policy, and Kerry was very good. Bush was good, but it was Kerry's issues. The Bush campaign, Jim Baker, was wrong for negotiating that the domestic debate would be the last one. So about 2 weeks before the election, Kerry had a nice bounce because it looked like he had won that debate, and it looked like terrorism in Iraq would fade into the background as an issue in the election. And at that point, it looked like Kerry was going to win. Then on the Monday, 8 days before the election, the New York Times ran a front-page story that there had been a cache of weapons in Iraq that had been left unguarded, and that all the insurgents who were shooting at American troops and planting bombs to kill them stole their weapons from this unguarded cache, and that was arming the terrorists that were killing our soldiers. And that really was a huge deal. The Times granted above the fold. Kerry pulled all of his ads and put all of his ads focusing on that issue. But he didn't realize that all of a sudden the issue had turned. It was no longer the domestic policy issues that dominated as a result of the last debate, but the weapons cache in Iraq, because of the New York Times story and because of Kerry's embrace of that as the key issue in the election. And Kerry never learned that he could never win the terrorism issue. He could never win the Iraq issue. Just like Bush could never win the education issue or the environment issue or the Social Security issue. The party skew was too set one way or the other. But what you could do is manipulate what the topic of the election was. And in the last week, both Kerry and Bush were talking about Iraq. It turned out later in the week that the story was false, that the cache had remained guarded, that the Times story was overblown, and it was discredited. But that wasn't as important as the fact that everything focused on Iraq as we came into the closing days of the election. Then the exit polls came out, and they all showed Kerry winning. And all the commentators didn't say it because they couldn't say it before the polls closed, but they all knew that Kerry had won the election based on the exit polls. And they were all kind of saying that or not saying it, but hinting at it. And I was watching the election at home, and I saw the first state to come in, which was Kentucky, followed by Indiana. And I saw that Bush was running about 4 or 5 points better in Kentucky and in Indiana than he had in the year 2000, when it was basically a tie election in the popular vote. So I predicted that Bush would win the election by about 3 points. And early in the evening, that prediction was kind of attacked by everybody. Newsmax spread it all over the place. And but by the end of the night, it was kind of a little bit of a coup. Bush won by 3 points and went on to serve a second term as president. By the way, in addition to the history videos, Eileen and Clayton Leota and I have written a book called Dubs Runs for President. And the goal of the book is to really help you see through the eyes of our cute little golden retriever what the political process is all about, what it means, what's going on. And Dubs does a very effective job in his campaign. It turns out that he won. While watching Wolf News, not Fox News, Wolf News, they saw something unexpected. Dubs got the most votes. He was elected. America was so happy. There was a big celebration. Now Dubs would be president of the world's greatest nation. And everyone could finally see how wonderful democracy can be. So get a hold of this book for your kids and grandkids. It'll really give them a way to follow the political process and make it live for them. Thank you.